Good morning. Today is the second uh, interview that we have as part of the Community Voices. And I'm particularly pleased to have met our esteemed guest, Sue Ford. And just like the previous conversation, the purpose is really to gain an understanding of Colville Estate, Hoxton, and perhaps even Greater Hackney. And with that introduction, I would like to welcome Sue. And maybe if I can start by asking if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, the bits that you want us to know, of course, and we take it from there.
Okay, I'm not too sure what to say about myself. I'm Sue Ford. I'm 65 years old. I lived in Hoxton. I can't even remember when I came, but I was probably early 20s. And so I've known Hoxton since the late 70s, early 80s. And I arrived in Hoxton. I had some friends who kind of lived this way. And then I swapped a council flat I had in Camden for one on the Colville Estate, because at the time, Camden was regarded as buzzy, but I was living on York Way, which was at the time a red light district. So it was quite hard for a young woman. You know, I couldn't come into King's Cross Station. I had to go over Camden Road. And it was, so I just thought, oh, Hoxton, let's move to Hoxton. And people used to say to me, where's Hoxton? And I said, just makes me laugh now, because it was so well connected. Even then, we didn't have the connections, but, like I could walk to Old Street, walk to Liverpool Street, get the 38 bus almost anywhere. Yeah, so it's not that I liked the area or disliked it. It's just when you're young, you don't really have, I was always brought up not to have preconceptions about what an area was or wasn't. What I will say about it is that's changed really for the good over the years that I've been here is at the time, some friends of mine regarded as Hoxton as part of the white corridor that ran all the way out to Essex. So it's much more multiracial than it was then. And, we had a branch of the BNP or the NF up at Old Street. So I used to come out at Old Street Station and the whole station would be sprayed up with NF signs. And I'd kind of literally, it was so quiet between Old Street Station was quiet on weekends and Pittfield Street was quiet. So he used to come out and just think, please God, don't let me run into any of these guys. So it was, and there was a lot of poverty in the area. I think, I remember going into the co-op on Hoxton Street when I first moved here, because we had Maria's the chippy, which did great chips. And Maria was in there in those days, sort of she. But I used to just remember going, because I grew up in South London in Tooting Bec. I remember going into the co-op and I saw this woman, literally old-fashioned malnutrition. It was like she had a child in her buggy, 2 children on either side, and they were like that proper old-fashioned malnourished, little skinny bodies and boggle eyes just looking at the food. And yeah, it was quite a poor area. I think at one point it was one of the poorest areas in Western Europe. So people kind of glamorize about the past, but it wasn't easy being a young black woman here. It seemed to me a very white area. There was a lot of poverty, some levels of intolerance. Like I had a couple of friends who were gay who were beaten up on Pittfield Street. We used to have fights at the back of the estate between sort of I think it was the kids coming from Islington fighting there. I had what I called safe routes in. I used to come down Pittfield Street because it was largely empty, And there was one guy who had kind of quite profound mental health problems who lived in one of the blocks there. If I saw him, I'd just kind of duck. And then once he'd gone off ranting elsewhere, I could come down. It was totally empty down Pittfield Street, you know, late of a night. So, you know, and then you used to come onto the estate and like you'd see like stolen goods being moved around. You just kept your mouth shut. You know, so it's just, I mean, you're a young person, you don't really think it's any of your business, and especially as a young black person, the police are the enemy anyway. So
when you came, you know, when you first arrived in Colville Estate, um, did you find a place, despite all the challenges that you highlighted, overall, did you feel that you are in a community, or did you feel that you are in an atomized environment?
I probably put myself in an atomized environment. I didn't particularly feel part of the community, but at 20 years old, you're more interested. Like we used to have all the, you know, kind of like there were like warehouse raves taking place, you know, parties taking place up on like in Shoreditch, you know, which was a very different place. You know, it's almost like at that young age, I wasn't born into the community. I've come as a, you know, as an outsider to some extent. And I, you know, it's like I didn't feel threatened. My next door neighbour she's still there, you know, sort of, and she was, you know, had her young daughter at some point, and her husband was a caretaker on the estate. So kind of, I used to, like going out, like the Rosemary Branch was still there. And the Rosemary Branch was the one pub that you kind of knew you could go in, that everyone went in there, you know. So you used to get like the, you know, like if you want to call middle class socialist workers in there. And, you know, so if I, you know, so it was just, it's hard to say, you know, like when you're 20, you know, 21, 22 years old, you just want to party. I did, you know, and work. And yeah, I didn't really know anyone that much on the estate. I remember coming down, and next to where Hassan lived, there used to be a woman called Kathy who used to sit out there. Kathy wasn't very well, but she had the most amazing brown hair. I could always say hello to Kathy as I walked past, and she'd always say, like, she just used to sit at her door looking, you know, looking out. But yeah, I didn't really madly associate with anyone or think about a community then. You just didn't. Like, your community was your mates that you hung around with, and they came from all over London.
But within the state, you were, or were you not able to make friends with people of your own age?
I didn't try.
Why was that? If I may ask.
As I say, I just used to get up, go to work, go out partying as much as I could. I had quite an established life. By the time you're 20, you know, late teens, early 20s, you've got your friends, you know, sort of like I'd just finished my degree. And there was you know, sort of like there was 2 years when I wasn't on the estate, you know, sort of my sister was in the flat because I went to live in Germany. So that would also be a kind of break. I'm not a very sociable person. It's, you know, like I'm happy to say hello, goodbye to people. And if people want help, you know, like, but even now, I'd say most of my life is off the estate.
So, as so you were a hybrid insider-outsider within the community. Would that be a fair description?
actually, yeah, like I lived happily on the estate, you know, sort of like I didn't feel worried, you know, but I'd say it's not my nature to embed myself really in a community, even though I've ended up embedded in this one, you know. But it was a very different estate as well, because, you know, like if you think we had the kind of like the start at the time of, you know, like I suppose what was the heroin and crack academic. So we were coming into things like you'd get, you know, like people's drug paraphernalia
in the state,
in the actually in our entrance hall, you know, sort of by where the stairs are. You know, you used to get like human excrement in the lift where people had just, you know, like this, you know, heroin makes you release, you know. So it was, it wasn't like you wanted to be outside of the community, but it's not, you know, you'd see it's not they if you're involved in drug usage, you're not you know, like you're quite protective of yourself, and that's not everywhere on the estate. But I just pass, you know, sort of like the people on the stairs and kind of go, oh, hi, you know, sort of like
was there a community-led initiative to clean up the state from these uh, illicit, undesirable activities?
well, I wouldn't be aware of that, you know, sort of because I wasn't. I mean, obviously, it would concern people. You might be better speaking to my neighbour about that, because she would have had a young child in the. It has cleaned up enormously, I think, over time. You know, sort of like Hackney Council, as much as people moan about them, and I'm one of the big moaners. Housing management, the laws also tightened up around housing management. So Hackney are much tougher on things than they would have been at the time. It's easier to get things cleaned, you know, sort of like it's easier to access your housing officer, and the housing officers tend to take things more seriously. I mean, I remember going into the housing office, and sometimes you'd just go in there and like somebody would kiss their teeth at you, turn their face, walk away, and you kind of sit there and kind of go, okay, I'll just wait then. So I think things around housing and housing management have tightened up. You know, the councils are, I mean, in the 90s, Hackney Council had a pretty bad reputation for, you know, mismanagement, you know, and I think that's really tightened up.
And do you feel that mismanagement or improved management, did that in any way impact the way the state's regeneration was planned?
So the regeneration that we're experiencing now is a third attempt to regenerate the Colville. I wasn't involved in the first two. I remember the then chair of CETRA did a lot of door knocking, and the original plans to regenerate the estate were quite visionary. Obviously, we were operating in a very different political climate, you know, but they envisaged things like if you ask a lot of people what their heart's desire would be for a home, it would be, because it's something we're brought up to also probably want in the UK, but it's like a house with a garden. And that was kind of like the vision. There were plans to beef some flats, but, you know, largely the idea was is that if people wanted, you know, a house with a garden, you know, the second attempt fell through with a lot of bitterness. And I sort of became aware of that because at that point, and that was the point when I became involved, which you're going...
That would be roughly when?
Probably around about 2012.
Okay.
I remember coming first to a meeting, probably about 2012. You have to ask PPCR with, you know, I contacted PPCR because I thought I don't even want the estate to be regenerated. I kind of quite like it. It's a bit run down, but it works for me. You know, we've got big square rooms. You know, people tend to you know, my flat particularly wasn't damp, you know, so I wasn't really aware of the other problems that people were experiencing. And I hadn't really considered things like the thing about the Colville is people maybe are very attached to the old Colville. But my understanding is these homes went up in the 1940s after the war, just post-war, when they knocked down some houses that were like, I think a bit like de Beauvoir was, that were Georgian houses, Georgian Vicky houses that had fallen into disrepair. And they built what they called homes for heroes. But they were just, you can see by the design of the estate, they were just whacking them up, you know, sort of, they're not especially well built. I think they sort of say something, they speak to how Britain has traditionally treated its working class, because they probably didn't have any heating. That's a retrofit. You know? You think you're coming back from fighting a war and you're coming into one of these. It's not a well-built estate. So I think even if you didn't go for a regeneration option, which I was against a regeneration option, these flats are probably reaching the end of their useful lives.
So if you were not so happy with the regeneration plan, was that the regeneration plan as presented by Hackney, or was it that you felt that the state should remain as it is with its existing demographic makeup?
So that's kind of probably about 10 questions into.
Answer one by one.
So if we start off with what is called the master plan, or if we go pre-regeneration so Hackney, the councils are obliged to engage with the residents whenever there is a regeneration. What I'd say is you're asked leading questions. So I think there should be a whole exercise before any regeneration takes place to upskill residents so that they can really meaningfully take part in their own regeneration. And looking back with hindsight, we put a lot of hours into, you know, because it was almost like Cetra morphed into the RSG, and Cetra was never representative of the then community because it had come out of the old community, probably, like that was originally on the estate when I moved. Like, all of us were quite old by then. And so we were involved in the master plan, and there were split opinions within. In a way, I'd say you didn't get an opportunity at the time I came on board to say whether yay or nay to the regeneration. What Hackney had done is they'd done a survey of their properties, and the properties that were considered able to, they went for a decent homes initiative. I hope I'm accurate on this. You know, what I'm saying is all from memory and from my learning on the job. Whereas estates like the Colville were earmarked for demolition and regeneration because they were regarded as in too poor a state to actually be brought up to the decent home standard, which I would say, you know, once I started hearing the problems that were on the estate, people living in damp accommodation, you know, sort of like the windows, you know, so you know, I can see how Hackney got to that option. Once we get to the regeneration option, what I'd say is that we're given a chance to input into how we'd like the regeneration to look. there are fashions in architecture, and the architects, what you're doing is you're talking to people who aren't empowered, who are learning on the job, who aren't necessarily totally representative of their communities, who are, I say, looking back with hindsight, I was led by the nose to the master plan by the architects and Hackney. They ask leading questions. They potentially think about what they can deliver. So there was a very big push. I was the only person on that, the initial, what was Cetra steering group, that was like, I actually like high rise, and I think high rise, if it's given to the appropriate people, is a good option for housing, because if it's sensibly given, you can generate hopefully more green space. But the majority of the committee wanted low rise, which is why the heights of the estate, as you see it, were agreed. You know, relative, a bit higher than we've got, but not high rise. So we had some input, but there's things that are then, you're not. If I could go back to 2013 and rewind the whole things, I would have asked for training straight away so that I could have been more meaningfully involved with that, so that the community, and I would have said, you're not really getting a representative section of community, because this is a rapidly changing estate, you know, sort of like a lot of the people that started off on the regeneration have died, or some of them have died, which gives you an idea of the age of people that were coming.
How did they choose, or how did they organize who can, should, or is welcome to the steering committee?
So the steering committee essentially morphed. There was already an active residents association, and the steering committee, the resident steering group, kind of just came out of that group. There, to my knowledge, there wasn't an active hunt for a more diverse or a more representative membership. And the other thing I'd say that I think for me, with having taken part, I'd say that there's more innovative ways of engaging with people and getting a bigger breadth of opinion than having a steering committee and, in a way, necessary, you know, potentially fun days. Yeah, if that makes sense.
So do you think Hackney was genuinely interested in input from the residents, or was that more of a tick box exercise, you know, just to say we've done it?
No, I'd say there was a genuine interest. I'd say that's over the years that I've been involved with the regeneration, I'd say potentially that's diminished, not because the people that are doing the regeneration now or seeing through, but also the political climate has changed. The funding models have changed, you know. So when we first started, we had like the deputy mayor was quite involved, and then the successive mayor. So there was, I'd say there was, I think they were interested. I think, yeah, I'm not saying that Hackney aren't interested in consulting, but I think they tend to ask leading questions, and I think they're potentially bound by funding models, like the funding models, like we were never allowed to see the financial modelling, and we're never empowered to produce financial models of our own. So the funding model they use at the moment is like cross-subsidy. All of the councils do it. It's not particular, and people tend to get drawn into conversations about, you know, either pro or against what you're doing. You see the same thing. You saw the same thing happening with Britannia, and now with Hackney Central, there's going to be a big. Whereas to me, it's kind of, the innovative thing to do would be to try and get people involved that could look at different funding and different construction methods that potentially could deliver more truly social and affordable housing, you know. But as everything you come up against now, if you start, like, to me, the Colville is not delivering enough social rent housing. All they're doing is replacing the existing social housing. So everyone who is an existing social tenant or an existing leaseholder will get a place on, but there is no new social housing coming onto the estate, despite the density being trebled. And Hackney will justify that by saying we have to use the cross-subsidy model.
Can you break that down for me,
The
please?
cross-subsidy model is you need to build a certain number of private homes for private sale, and they will subsidise the social homes, the building of the social homes. They do get some funding from central government, depending which government is in power, and how much funding they choose to give, you know. So,
and do you think that presumably with the injection of or creating private housing versus not building new social housing, how would that, in your opinion, impact the demographic cohesion or the makeup of the Colville Estate specifically?
so that's such an interesting question, and the answer for me would be very long-winded. So I think because of the history of social housing, I remember first going down trying to get a council. What I think is it absolutely could be amazing, but somebody has to put the effort in to making it work. And the council won't do this. And it's quite interesting when you look at the history of social housing, what happened, because it was always in, well, I just get so many threads here. I'll try. If you go over to Thamesmead, when Thamesmead was first built, that big estate there that they're also now regenerating, they actually had a community officer, and which was because they were creating a community from scratch. You know, they were moving people from areas that, you know, Thamesmead was totally new. And I think we could do with paid positions with enabled people that help to build those bridges that you need, because it's really a good thing to have people from different walks of life. But some people have those very strange views about each other, you know, like some of them is kind of like people who've maybe lived on the estate for donkey's years are kind of like a bit like they're looking down on us. And then other people who live in the flats are like, oh, they're not paying their tax. You know, there's a lot of, you know, like I talk to people who think that council tenants are given their properties for free. It's like, no, we're paying rents, we're paying taxes. Most of us work, you know, sort of like, and then people have strange ideas about who lives in the towers. So absolutely, it could be so positive. People could share their experiences, their knowledge. It would help to build a cohesive society, but that requires work, and that requires really skilled, dedicated people that, you know, currently we have like one person, you know, Gloria, is kind of trying to build those bridges and she's not being paid for it, you know.
So really, if we say the idea of connecting the people who have lived long in this Colville Estate and new arrivals, that's something that CETRA, which you also previously mentioned, can do? Or do you think this is something that actively Hackney Council should do in terms of creating channels of communication to avoid misunderstanding, which could lead to a better social cohesion?
I think it's something that's open to discussion, really. I don't think there's a set way of doing it, but I think it needs to be acknowledged it's a piece of work. Because if you look at what's happening borough-wide, like people talk about gentrification, and what gentrification to me means is that, and it's a big issue for London-wide, I'd say, is getting people to talk to each other, to talk to people who aren't like them. Like I now go into, you know, like say, as soon as somebody sets up an artisan coffee shop, for example, and they paint it grey, it's almost excluding people. And the people in there don't think that they're being exclusive, but they've set up a coffee shop that says generally, you know, you are white, you're middle class, you know, sort of not exclusively white, you know. And so I think it's a big piece of work for London as a whole. Like London prides itself on being incredibly multicultural, multinational, multi-generational, but people tend to stay in their tribe. And I think as you build these new communities, which have huge potential really, to get people talking to each other, there needs to be some thought given. And when you speak to Hackney about, you know, like the space under the towers was envisaged always for private rental. You know, it must always wash its own face, but it was envisaged as a kind of space that would partly benefit and bring the new communities together. And Hackney have put some effort into finding suitable tenants and involving Cetra in those conversations. But really, it's quite a big piece of work. You know, I do think they need to start thinking about, you know, maybe paid posts, you know, like for some sort of community engagement.
I would,
or at least some funding for.
No, I mean, perhaps I'm biased here, but I certainly think that Cetra needs to be better financially supported so it can
Absolutely
fulfill
agree.
a lot of the functions that, for whatever reason, Hackney is unable or unwilling to do. But you mentioned a couple of acronyms, PPCR and RSG. What are they?
Oh, yeah, sorry. So PPCR are our independent tenant and leaseholder advisor.
That's PPCR.
Ah, yes.
And
So
we have one in Hackney?
PPCR is a name of a company, and that
Okay.
company is employed by Hackney to provide tenants and leaseholders with independent advice during the regeneration. So if you think you are don't understand what's going on in the regeneration, or that you're being mistreated by Hackney PPCR would be your first point of call. And they're the first point of call for like Cetra and the RSG, which stands for Regeneration Steering Group, which is a group of residents of the estate.
Which is your part of that? Yes,
I'm part of that, who meet with Hackney regularly to input into the regeneration. And PPCR are our independent advisors. But there's a slight tension there because they're paid by Hackney.
Okay. Well,
which obviously is a slight tension, but it is what it is. You know, Hackney are obliged to provide.
So legally they're obliged.
Legally they're
obliged. Will
you
be continuing your work with the steering group?
So I would
Since you've been involved for
I think a
decade or so now.
Yes, it's probably time for me to sort of slowly shuffle off. But what I'd really like to do is to stay. I have kind of quite a lot of concern around Hackney's accelerating the regeneration, which is a good thing. So it means hopefully all existing permanent residents and leaseholders will be moved by the end of 2027 is what they're working towards. I think that's a really good thing because people have lived in damp and horrible places that aren't adequate for them. Some people are overcrowded. So in theory, it's a good thing. in practice, it's how people get treated as they go through the conversations with the Hackney teams as to the flats they're going to get and where they can stay on the estate. We've had sort of histories of people feeling that they're being bullied and pushed around and not, you know, and also just ensuring that people get what they need. So I will probably try and stay until that those conversations. So hopefully till the end of 2027, we're largely through that. So I hope I can input into that and keep, you know, and then I just think it's time, you know, by then we'll be moving on to a fact where all our existing residents hopefully are housed as they want to be. And then it will just be thinking about how we develop the rest of the estate, and there'll be a fight. Again, it will depend politically who's in power to try to ensure we do deliver a bit more social housing in some of the more favourable plots. But that fight would probably be better off being taken on by younger, more visionary people. You'd like to involve some of the newer people on the estate, you know, because we'll get a whole, you know, phase 4 will be all, the way it's planned at the moment, will be largely new social tenants. So hopefully you'll have a whole new group of fresh people with an idea of what they want their estate to look like. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I know we have a limited time, and it really has been very, very enjoyable listening to you. I think it certainly has given me a different perspective of Colville's history and challenges.
Yeah.
And I do hope that you continue your fantastic work with the community.
Yeah, I hope to grow old on this estate. I just love it.
Thank you so much.
I'm old already, but even older.
Thank you so much, and many thanks for
thanks for being such
giving us your
patient,
time. Thank you.
Patient listener. Thank you.